Hey, welcome to Whitecap, the Canadian Sailing Podcast. I'm Dave Krypton, longtime dinghy sailor and passionate fan of Canadian sailing. I also manage a sailing collective in New Brunswick called the Skull Island Race Team. Today, as we head off into the off-season in Canada, we're talking about sailing fitness, as well as tracking and planning your year ahead. I'm excited to talk to the authors of a new book called Plan, Sail, Track, the Ultimate Sailing Guidebook. Our first author is Signe Ronka, the owner and head coach of FlexiFit, an internationally recognized figure skating fitness training organization. As an athlete, she has been on the podium in both national and international competitions, and as a coach, she has worked with skaters from beginner level to Olympic champions. Welcome, Signe.
Thank you.
Next, Thomas Fogh, Director of Sailing at the Royal Canadian Yacht Club. A former member of the national team, he competed at an international level in multiple classes, including Solings, Lasers, and Tornadoes, before moving into high-performance coaching, working with provincial, national, and Olympic caliber athletes. Thomas, welcome.
Thank you. Good to be here.
Thomas, you may also have the distinction of being my first guest that I competed at the same regatta as.
Oh.
We're not racing against each other, but I'm going to say 1986 Kingston Eastern Canadian Under-16 Championships.
Yeah, that's about right. That sounds right. Yeah, that sounds right.
I was racing laser twos.
Okay.
So the book is great. I've read it. I think it's a great tool. I'm going to be using some aspects of it that we'll get into a little later. But first, Signe, can you tell me how this book came about?
Yeah, so actually it's a really funny story. Thomas's daughter used to figure skate, and we kind of connected years and years ago through that association where I was training her a little bit of off-ice training to help her get better with her skating and her jumping. And I think Thomas came to my studio once or something, and he saw the training, and he was like, oh, this is kind of cool stuff like you do for figure skaters, and maybe the sailing world could use some of this. And I guess we started chatting about it a little bit, probably over 8 years ago now. And after she finished skating, we kind of lost touch and stuff. And then randomly, he reached out to me and was, I guess backtrack a few years, I created a planned skate track book for figure skaters. So very similar to the one that we created together for sailing, but it was for figure skaters. And throughout the years, I guess Thomas could speak to that more for himself in terms of how he thought it could relate to sailing. But that's in a way how we connected initially to help his race team to get into fitness a little bit more. And then as we, started chatting more and got to know each other in terms of what the sailing team needs more, we were thinking, well, maybe they also would benefit from this kind of book with a little bit of fitness, education on periodization and goal setting, and that sort.
So, Thomas, what are kind of the goals of the book then, after you guys started putting it together?
Well, as Signe mentioned, my daughter was using it for figure skating, and I was always looking at different sports and what they do, and can you bring certain ideas to sailing and that nature. So that book was sort of in the back of my mind in terms of what can we do. And as I was, getting more involved with program development, particularly on the race team, the club race team side, I was sort of like, how can I help the coaches? How can I help the kids advance to the next level, from a high performance perspective? And the book kind of kept coming back to me, like, is there a resource that we can provide them that works? And when I moved to RCYC, Signe's studio's literally just down the street. And so I kind of connected with her, and we started chatting, and lo and behold, the book came out of it. Through a few discussions, we decided to do a book, and it's really to give, the racers, the sailors themselves, a direction and a focus and a pathway. But it's also, I also kind of wanted to make it twofold with that the coaches, some of them which are still fairly young and inexperienced relative to some others, a resource that they could use to work with their sailors. So it's kind of like twofold.
Right. The book is sorted into three different sections: periodization, planning, setting smart goals, and then tracking your success. So maybe Signe, if you could take me through the idea of periodized planning and how that relates to setting up your season for
Yeah,
sailing.
absolutely. I think in any sport, periodization is an important part of yearly practice with any athlete in any level. In particular, if I relate it to figure skating, for us, a lot of the times, and it's possible in sailing too, when you're at a younger stage and you're not at the top level of your sport yet, you might not even realize or think about these kind of things that need to be done. But at the end of the day, if we train our athletes in any sport from a young age to set goals and figure out what the year looks like, map out a plan, whether it's, when to get new equipment or whatever that might look like, it teaches the athlete accountability of what they're going to accomplish or what they need to accomplish and working together as a team with their coaches to accomplish those goals, whether they're beginner or elite Olympic athletes. And so periodization from start to finish it can be broken down into 4 seasons. So we have off season, post season, pre-season, and in season. So all of these can be taken down into cycles of training. So you can plan for a monthly, 3-month kind of plan, and then break it down to 3-week plan, and then break it down even more into kind of the macro meso cycles of the weekly kind of daily plans. And then how do we get there so we're not overtraining maybe, or we're not burning out too early. And so you're really looking at it from a bigger perspective. And if we teach the kids young, when they're little, I mean, at a certain age, obviously, when they start understanding, it just allows them to develop that over the years and just start perfecting it. So when they get to that top level, they've got it really refined.
Thomas, what about the SMART goals, setting SMART goals? What does that mean?
Yeah, adding the goal setting. It's one thing to map out your year and set your goals. I want to peak at this event or something like that. But goal setting, again, this goes back to helping the sailor focus on the task, but also the coach. Is what I saw a lot of was sailors would arrive and then they'd sort of look at the weather and say, oh, it's windy or light air, and we'll do this we'll do this today, and we'll do that tomorrow, and there wasn't sort of like, well, you need to sort of repeat, a specific skill to perfect it, and multiple times. And when I look at the Olympic level athlete, what they do to do that stuff, and I've done it myself in my Olympic campaigns, so it's really there's sort of two parts of it. One is to actually write out a specific skill goal, right? So you have to think about the steps. If you want to jibe in heavy air, like what are the steps to accomplish that? So it makes the sailors and the coaches think of the various steps and try to accomplish each step. And then the second part is actually, setting goals, whether it's monthly, weekly, or daily, so that you've got a focused training opportunity. And again, it goes back to what Signe sort of said was, if you start them at the young age, it becomes more routine as they go up the ladder, and sort of helps them focus.
There's an acronym there, right? SMART.
Yes.
Specific, measurable, achievable, realistic, and trackable. So all of those are across the board, very typical in any sport that you can apply, or even in life in general. You can set these kind of goals that are based on the SMART principle.
Right. You guys sent me a book. Thank you very much. And put my podcast in the back as a resource, which thank you. And then, I started using it because I do still train. I still race lasers fairly actively. And I just started using it, for example, like on the daily plan. Like, okay, my monthly goals, my weekly goals, my daily goals, right? So even though I think this is an important thing possibly for people to just know that they can just drop into this book anywhere. For me, anyway, I was like, okay, so I'm just going to, my daily goal today, I want to work on luffing in place, okay? So that was the date, August 11th, luffing in place. What am I going to do? Find a mark and stand next to it, and then I wrote a little debrief and stuff. So just tell me about how a coach could use this book, Thomas, to help track specific goals or specific maneuvers that a sailor might want to get better at.
Yeah, well, what I find today is, a lot of the, with you and I grew up sailing, we didn't have the coaches at the events, right? So we had to sort of do the thought process and the understanding ourselves. Today, coaching some of the kids, I find, they come over to the coach, they look at them and say, okay, how'd I do? What do I do next, right? And they're not sort of thinking through. So what the goals are, whether it's, monthly, weekly, daily, is it forces them to write it down, think about kind of what they're trying to work on and how, like, what they're going to do to work on that skill. So you're luffing in place. Okay, what do you need to do to achieve that goal, and what's sort of a pass versus a fail? And so the coach can work with the sailor on that specific skill, get it on the water, perform the skill, and then sort of say, did we achieve what we wanted to do? Did we meet the targets? And it just, again, it gives them a focus as opposed to just saying, let's go to a mark and say, God, that was good, you did pretty good today. And not having, and if you did that for a week or 2 weeks straight, and you could track sort of, are you getting better? And the whole point of the book is, can you see progress, through your sailing, whether it's a fitness, whether it's a skill, whether it's, your results, something like, it's all about, can you see progression? And that's what the goals are meant to be, is to define them, think about them, and do them, and then have you gotten better over that period of time.
Right. And so the third section is called Track Your Sailing Success. Signe, can you kind of go through that section and what the ideas are in that
I think
section?
this section, Thomas will be better.
Oh, you were just doing that.
There's a lot of stuff on equipment and everything that he probably will have.
Yeah, I think when we created. Yeah, when we created the book, obviously Sydney's not the sailor, but I did take her sailing for the first time. So she got out and learned all about it.
What kind of sailing did you do?
We just, the club here has some Ideal 18s that we took out, and just taught her some of the basics, and sort of to get a sense of what do the kids do on the water, and she like in terms of just having to sort of, pull the sheets in, turn, thinking, how to, the thinking process, and then from the fitness perspective, like what, stuff like that. So,
I can do that quite well after.
but in terms of the tracking, it's obviously, the planning, the goal setting, that's great, but we need to also look at the specific sailing skill. We got to, we have to perform on the water. So we can plan. We can set our goals. I want to win this, or I want to do that. But now on the water. Are you seeing progression on the water in terms of your skills? Whether it's attack, a jibe, a start, tactics. We have one of the sections is just your daily training kind of skills, and then one is actually a regatta analysis. So you can analyze your regatta. What worked well for you and what didn't work well for you, so you can go back and say, hey, our starts weren't very well, so let's go home and work on some starts, so next regatta will be better. So the whole point of tracking is now this is the on-water portion. This is where you're going to see, are your goals of, tacking better, coming to fruition, on the water.
How does this book look different than yours for skating, Signe?
Well, it's actually very similar in a way, but in terms of tracking your success, there's a lot more, I guess, objective kind of things that you can measure, where you either land a jump or you don't land a jump, and you get a score for that. Or with tracking in the figure skating book, we can do tracking for spins and speed. We can do how many jumps you landed consistently out of 10. We have competition tracking, so what you write down all your elements for the program, and then during your practice you can have your coach mark down the GOEs, which is grade of execution, for each one. And so it's interesting because then you could go to the competition and almost like match what you got from your coach to what the judges gave you. So it's almost like the coach is under pressure to say kind of mark that you got. So things like that, it's similar, but different, obviously, because Thomas and I were chatting about it. It's we were saying, well, you can't really measure the wind speed when you're out there every time. It's never going to be the same, so you're never going to do the same movement. So that kind of stuff is difficult to track. Whereas in skating, not that it's always the same, but it can be, this jump is either a land or a not land, or this spin you can do in 10 seconds versus 8 seconds, right? So those kind of measurable results are more clear maybe in that sense.
It's fascinating the difference between the two sports because, well, first of all, my sister was a figure skater, a competitive figure
Oh,
skater, and my dad was way into it. And he got like we had. I'm from Moncton, New Brunswick, and we had Skate Canada '77, I think, in
yeah.
Moncton. So it was she didn't compete in it, but like he was so into helping her out, like many parents in sailing and other different events, that he got very organized, and we had the nationals there in '74 and '85. So I think more than most guys, I'm into figure skating. So
Wow, what a small
uh,
world, huh?
Yeah.
yeah, no, I love it, and I love watching it. Anyway, I it's fascinating the differences and the similarities. Like there's so much coaching going on in sailing now compared to when I came through, and it's great. Like I'm not the guy that says, "Oh, back in my day it was better because I had to carry my own water bottle," but it, at this point, sailing has become almost one-on-one the way the figure skating has. Would you say, Thomas?
Yeah, I definitely like, I wouldn't say it's better. It's just different than what we were used to growing up. And um, you know, it, it's definitely getting more one-on-one for sure as you get to the higher levels. You're getting smaller teams, the direct coaching, direct feedback, and that kind of stuff. So yeah, and then again, the difference I would say with the figure skating versus sailing is that when I watched my daughter figure skate, a lot of the coaches were, older, right? They were 30, 40, maybe even up in their 50s, right? And had been, high-ranked figure skaters. Where in sailing, we don't have that older coaching crowd. There's a few clubs that have one here, one there sort of thing. But in general, if you look at a race team, 4 out of the 5 coaches are 20, are still at university. And, I'm not, some have better experience than others, but so, again, so part of the book was to help them, as much, as much as the sailor, to give them a focus and direction.
That is fascinating. In my club, growing up in New Brunswick, and still to today, um, the Optimist program is not a big thing. Like the sailors are not into sailing them so much. There's not a big fleet of them in the regattas, so people are kind of more 420s and Ilkas and stuff. But I've people have told me that one of the reasons, and my kids, for example, hated being in Opties. They hated them. But it's been suggested to me that one of the reasons that the kids didn't like sailing Opties is because their coaches didn't know how to sail Opties, or more specifically, didn't know how to coach them how to
Yep.
sail Opties. Is that something you found in the coaching world, Thomas?
A little bit. It's definitely harder to find, you know, good race coaches that know a class specifically. It's the pool's small. They are out there, but it's small. But I think it also goes back to the experience, right? When I look at figure skating, some of the coaches there were, such as Signe, former junior international skaters, and junior Canadian, junior national team or something like, they're quite high ranked, and gone through very competitive. Where today a lot of the race coaches are accomplished sailors but more at a local level. So they've done a lot of local fleets. They've done Cork, possibly, maybe an odd, bigger event because it was held at Cork or something like that. But they don't, we don't have a lot of former national team or Olympians that are coaching at, because it's a seasonal, very seasonal, which makes it difficult. So it's it's sort of how do we raise that knowledge? How do we kind of give them the resources to be more experienced? And, part of that is giving them a little bit of a pathway to kind of follow.
Right.
And that's
Right.
what the book does.
Definitely. And like you say, a pathway for the coaches. Like I feel like you said it a couple of times, but I think a coach should grab a hold of one of these and think about what they'd like to accomplish over the season, so much as what the sailors would want to accomplish. You also have a section in this for dryland fitness tracking. Fitness is something that in sailing is not way up there in the way people think about the sport so much compared to figure skating. Um, how like how hard is it for you to get your athletes to do training that's not specific to the ice, like to train what we would call dry land training, but like weights and this kind of fitness that's not just skating? Is it hard for you to get your, especially younger athletes, to do that kind of stuff?
Well, that's a great question. About probably 13 years ago or so, I was one of the first kind of like organizations or companies to open up a sport specific training program for figure skaters. Our dryland concept has really evolved, and I think I mean, I've been traveling internationally now for workshops and doing seminars and training skaters and certifying coaches, and you can really see, actually, even since COVID, that how the importance of off-ice training really came about when where there was no option to go skating, you had to take it to the off-ice. So in our sport, it is evolved quite a bit now, that now even the younger generations and the younger skaters are parents are aware that they should be doing some off ice, and they know that their kid isn't strong enough on the ice, so they start reaching out to see, what can I do. There's offerings of different levels that kids can join for our off ice training. So I think that's one thing Thomas was really concerned or maybe proactive about when he came to me, because it was like, well, you guys do so much and we don't do enough, I think. So it was.
Well, actually, and on a funny note, when Signe and I were talking about the fitness side, I said, yeah, most kids come in rig, the boats get ready, coach does a quick debrief, and they go sailing. And Signe goes, they don't warm up? I'm like, generally no. And she's like, she was flabbergasted that, like, oh my God, like you don't warm up? Like really? Like, I was like, no, the sail out to the race course, that's the warm up, right? That's sort of, right? So that, so when we got talking about the fitness was, again, just giving kids ideas in some of the key areas of sailing, which is like some strength, some agility, some balance, some core work, depending upon the different boats you sail, just to give them ideas. And so in the book, there actually is a warm-up and a cool-down. So coaches actually have something they can follow. Sailors have something they can follow, right? Because she almost like fainted when I told her that we don't do a warm-up.
Well, I came before the session with Thomas. I came like 20 minutes early, and I'm like doing arm circles and like stretching, and he's like, "What are you doing?" I was like, "Gotta warm up my shoulders." So, but no, jokes aside, I think even Thomas's son was in our book for some of the photos, and even just speaking with him and showing the exercise, he was like, "Wow, I should be doing all these exercises and doing more." And actually, he came to me after for a specific program plan to develop for his own practice. And what I did, actually, just to give a background, I know I'm not a sailing expert, but Thomas and I spent hours and hours talking and watching, and he would send me YouTube videos of everything and sailing, and all the movements I really analyzed and started to put together more sport-specific training exercises. So not just doing, a regular sit-up, but maybe having them lean back and take that position that they need to in sailing, and getting their feet flexed or whatever that might look like. You're looking over your shoulder and one side is like leaning, the hip flexors activated, all sorts of things that you could be trying to simulate, but then on top of that, complement as well.
Yeah, definitely some of the exercises in here in the dryland fitness section certainly are specific to the kind of things we do. To get back to that warm-up idea again, if you knew you were going to have to sail for an hour to get to the course, right, would you still do the same kind of warm-up, Thomas?
Yeah, I think, I like when I grew up, I didn't really do a warm-up either. So but no, I think, today's sports, it's changed, right? There's more, the people think about sort of warm-ups, cool-downs, the nutrition, like that the whole philosophy and how you think about it's changed relative to what we did. So yeah, I'd still warm up, and then your sail out, you're warmed up, so you can kind of like start getting in, start pushing yourself, so that you're not, you don't maybe do something on the way out that's, before you get to the race course, right? Like I was lucky, knock on wood, I didn't have any injuries or any back injuries, and I used to wear water bottle weight jackets way back when, but I know a lot of people that had back issues from it, right? And as Signe said, would a warm up or even sort of some specific exercises have helped. It wasn't sort of our thought process at the time. So
let's say now, 2023, you're out in St. Margaret's Bay and you're about to go sailing, and you know you're gonna sail for an hour to get to the course. I guess at this point we'd probably be pulling, but anyway, it'll be a long time before you actually start racing. Is there another like kind of warm up sequence you should do, like half an hour before it's start time?
Yeah, like once you're in the water, like you warm up, and as you sail out there, you're going to start sort of getting the sense of the boat, the wind, making sure the boat's, the controls, start, kind of planning as you get out there. And once you're out there, then you go through your pre-race routine, of sailing, up the course, collecting wind info, trying to, make sure your boat's set up for the conditions and things of that nature. But you've sort of warmed up on shore. You've kind of done a sort of kept it going as you're on your sail out. So when you're out there now, you can kind of really push and focus on, what you need to, and not worry about, oh, this hurts, like, and oh, like, maybe I just got to stretch my shoulder a little bit and wasting time before the course. So, it's all part of the process nowadays.
Right.
I wanted to mention one more thing on warm up. I think one thing I guess people think when they think warm up is like, oh, am I going to warm up and then I'm going to get sweaty and then I'm going to cool down? It's not necessarily that. So there's a couple components from a warm up perspective that should be included. So if you go out and you're going to be going for an hour, maybe the actual blood flow activation where it's like running and all that kind of stuff, you can do a little bit of that. Maybe it's not so important then for that kind of stuff, but it's more the other components like the dynamic stretching, the sport specific movements, and the glute activation or just activation drills with bands that they can do that will start to fire up muscles and prepare them. So even if you train an hour later or 2 hours later, if you have fired up your muscles a little bit in the morning, for example, you wake up and you do some dynamic movements even as you're exercising, and then you go off and do your day, you're going to feel a lot better about how you move, how you position your body, your posture, everything, versus like just rolling out of bed and kind of walking around the day and be sluggish and all that. So it's almost like a mental preparation wake up call a little bit as well.
Right. Interesting. Do you have people then that have come to you, Signe, like from the sailing world, who are then like working with you one-on-one for sport-specific fitness?
Yeah, I didn't do too much before, but since I met Thomas, and actually I trained a couple of the higher level sailing athletes like Sam Bonin and Will Bonin. They were a brother team earlier. I know the family, and they came to me actually, like I used to train the daughter for figure skating, and then they were also really interested in what I was doing, and I had them come to the studio and gave them program plans to do, and they found it extremely useful for injury prevention for hip flexor pain they were having. And that was a big thing with one of the brothers, that he had a lot of like hip pain and groin pain that was like from holding certain positions for too long. And so we came up with different drills for him to strengthen around the area. And he said after a couple of weeks, it felt so much better and he was back to normal.
You guys also have a section about nutrition in your in the book. What could you say about, maybe Thomas specifically, how a sailor going into a race day should look at their like nutrition regime for the day, let's say?
Yeah, so nutrition's very individualistic. It's it's what works for one won't necessarily work for the other. So it's really trial and error over a long period of time. But again, what I'm looking at in terms of when I develop a race team, here is we can take them out on the water, we can teach them the skills, starts, tacks, jibes, that kind of thing. But it's also supporting the sailor nowadays, with around it. So from fitness to nutrition to sports psychology to rules, tactics, like it's giving them that support network. So when we came up with the book, there was a fitness section, and obviously we want to talk a little bit about nutrition. Neither one of us are experts in the field per se, but we have enough knowledge and enough resources that we put a little bit together. So again, because where this book's targeted, it's also a little bit sort of at the beginner level. So it's getting them to think about nutrition, and what are they eating before they go out? And how'd you feel that day? Because maybe you had cornflakes for breakfast, but you don't process the milk very well when you're hiking in 50 knots of breeze, and maybe you should have had avocado toast or something, right? So it's understanding kind of what works for you and what doesn't, and it's just sort of again, it's sort of tracking. Like, if you look at it, we're not sort of saying eat this or that, but it's sort of tracking. What did you have for breakfast, snack, lunch? How did you feel? Tired or energetic? How did that affect your training? And then again, over time, you start figuring out, hey, when I have avocado toast every morning, I'm actually doing better, right? So again, it's getting them to start thinking about it, because part of this, part of this book is we're dealing with a race team, which is in many ways one step from a provincial team. And if some of those kids want to move up from provincial to national, they've got to start thinking about this, and it's getting them started at this age to start thinking about it. So as they go up, it becomes more routine.
Yeah. I'm looking at the page now, the nutrition page, like what I eat before I compete, right? And you just write it down. And if you wrote it down every day, it might be annoying, but then you could be like, oh, geez, on August 12th, I was really fast, and it turns out I actually, I had avocado toast. So yeah, that's what it is, right? It's all that's why it's tracking, right?
Yeah, I used to run a lot of marathons, some years ago. I don't think I could get partway through now, but it took me a while to figure out what do I eat in the morning before running 42 kilometers, right? And I realized certain things worked and certain things didn't, but it took a few marathons to start narrowing that down, and it's no different in sailing, because if you're going out and hiking, in 3 or 4 races and 15 some odd knots of breeze, you're using a lot of energy. And one of the things I do remember is this national team did some tests about, calories burned and things like that. And some of these guys were burning 6,000-7,000 calories in a 15-knot 3-race day. And
wow, yeah.
how do you replace that? Again, I'm not a nutrition expert to say, oh, you got to have this, this, and this, but write it down, start tracking it. Find an expert like Signe in fitness, but this time in nutrition. They can start working with you to maybe help you, and again, gain that little advantage over your competition.
Right. It's funny, the racing I do is generally in the Masters fleet, over 45 or 40, whatever it is, 35. And so there aren't as many coaches on the water. And there's a guy I met at Canadian Championships who has worked to rig up so he could put 3 bottles of Gatorade on the back of his hiking strap. Because we don't have a coach that we can sail over to, so it's quite a good setup, and it's not doing much. But that's the kind of thing that is important, that even a younger sailor might not think how much hydration they need.
Yeah. Well, it's I know, coaching some of the teams that I have, they'll come after a race and it's like, here, have some water. It's like, no, I'm good. I'm like, you just raced for 45 minutes. It's 25 degrees out, right? You got all this gear on. Like, trust me, you're dehydrated in some way. And it's like, no, I'm good, right? It's like, just drink it. And it's like, so they kind of reluctantly drink half, right? And again, it's part of it is we don't have, the experience or knowledge that, hey, 1% of dehydration is, 10% performance, right? So it's things of that nature. So again, it's starting the process, right? I don't know if I'll come up with a nutrition book necessarily, but it's, again, it's getting them to think about that aspect of sailing, because it is a sport, and sailing in 5 knots of breeze where you have to be really still, or whether it's 18, 20 knots of breeze and you're hiking and really working hard, they're both use a lot of energy, just different type of energy, and you've got to fuel that to maintain peak performance.
Something that keeps rattling around in my brain recently, my brother also does marathons, and he was telling me that the hardest part of finishing a marathon is like arriving at the start. Like, the hardest part of finishing is getting there, meaning training and stuff. And like, I think about it in terms of myself and the different times that I've injured myself training, which really pisses me off. Like, oh, I just pulled my hamstring lifting this weight. This really pisses me off. I wish at least this had happened on the water, right? So, Signe, how would you like approach your training, like when you're in the weight room, or when you're training and not competing, so that you don't get injured?
Yeah, that's a great question, because it happens all the time where somebody will go into the weight room and start being like, I have to get really strong and go above and beyond what they think they can do. And all of a sudden there's a pulled hamstring. I actually heard a recent story about that in sailing, believe it or not. But that's one thing where I would say the professionals have to come into place where they know the sailor, or they start working from ground up and do little tests by little to see how is your deeper hip strength, how is your knee stability, what is your ankle balance looking like, and then from those tiny things from ground up you can start to work on building more strength-based exercise, building on the power exercises that you might want to incorporate over time. But maybe your body isn't quite ready. Even you think, I'm ready, I'm energetic, and I go and I want to push myself, and maybe in your head you're like more of an athlete than what your body can actually handle in the weight room. I have to admit it's happened to me too sometimes, where I'm like, oh, I know I'm pretty good, but I've taken 3 weeks off of like fitness, and I go in and do like a simple single leg deadlift, and the next day for like 3 days I'm like, oh my god, I think I pulled my hamstring. So I think we've all had similar experiences where we should have just taken it down a notch and built slowly up. So for the off season, I think this is the best time to really start to look at building on injury prevention training exercises. Those are your like physical therapy exercises that you go as a proactive approach, to try to prevent injuries, and then build on your strength program gearing up to the start of the season when you can ramp up, and then eventually you'll have like that little bit of a plateau where you come down a little bit before your actual season starts. But yeah, that would be my biggest suggestion, is to take a really good look at those smaller muscle groups first to make sure everything is stable.
Right, right. Thomas, your father Hans is a legend in the sport, not just in Canada but in the world. 6-time Olympian, 2-time Olympian medalist. What kind of stuff did he do in his career that is reflected in this book?
Well, it certainly was different times what he did, but like I remember seeing pictures of him in the gym, lifting, doing different things, very sport specific. So he's on a hiking bench with a sheet in his hand, and he's pulling a sheet which has a 10-pound weight or 25-pound weight or whatever on the end of it. I remember seeing pictures like that. So when he was young, he was very, very active in the gym. When he, growing up here, he would be, as part of the national team, he was able to access some gyms, locally, and so he would, like every weekend he was in there. He had sort of some stuff at home he would do, that, so he, I wouldn't say he followed a strict program in any way, just because times were different back in the 70s and 80s when he was doing it. But he was following, he was following his program, and because he knew he had to stay fit to be competitive, and
right.
He knew, and growing up, in the 50s and 60s, sailing against Paul Elstrom, like it was who could out hike who when they're in training, right? Like, they'd be going upwind and legs are, bleeding, and it's like, I'm not going to lose, because when they got back in, it'd be chirping like crazy, right? So it was, so they knew that fitness was a key component for success. And, and obviously today it's much more structured. You have, people like Sydney doing sport specific, and things of that nature. Back then it was sort of just go to your local gym and do a bunch of exercises you think are right. But he was, I would say throughout his whole career, even up to almost to the day he passed, like he was, he would be out biking in the mornings, and he would, be downstairs doing stuff. Like he was always doing something to stay in shape.
And did they follow also the kind of the tracking programs that you're talking about? The SMART and like tracking your skill.
No, he wouldn't have known. He wouldn't have known that stuff, right? I think he based it on sort of what he felt and what he needed. Like, it's just, again, times have changed. Like I don't think anybody knew about SMART back in the 60s, when he was going through his peak part. But there's when he came to Canada and got on the national team, there's obviously some structure and some sort of resources available. Certainly different today than back then. But, so he had probably some help, but again, most of it was probably his own desire.
Right, right. So this is a section that I call Hijack the Guest. And where I get you to help me with something specific that I'm dealing with. And I said I didn't have a coach that regatta, that I had written all the, that I had debriefed with myself. I said I didn't have a coach. And in fact, I did. My son, who's a really great sailor, was coaching at that regatta, and he watched me surreptitiously. He told me that my tacks lacked urgency and had no passion. Sorry if that's embarrassing, but so I have been trying to work on my roll tacks in general. So given the tools that are in this book, how would I go from, let's say, now until, I guess it's November now when this is coming out, so until the spring or into the summer, what steps should I take to try to improve specifically, like my roll tacks and a laser?
So I guess that's for me.
Yeah, I guess so.
Well, I think obviously, getting on the water is the most important part. Obviously we're getting to the end of the season where we can't do that. So I think focusing on different things that you can bring back to the roll tack from the fitness perspective, right? So, looking at, some agility, some flexibility, things that can help you move through the boat a little easier. And then, and then the other part would maybe be is writing down that specific skill. Write down, 5 to 10 steps. What are the steps you need to go through in terms of, like, how quickly do you turn the rudder, right? How much do you need to lean the boat to windward? When do you go cross over? What's your footwork like? Kind of really detail the different parts of the movement so that, as you read them, it sort of becomes muscle memory. So when you get in the boat, you're maybe focusing on those, and then you can, your coach, your son, can then say, Dad, you didn't do number 1 right, and number 2 is better, right? So, and they can, and then you can kind of map out once you get back in the boat in the spring, I want to do first 5 steps in the first couple weeks, and then the next 5 steps in the next couple weeks, right? So that's what the whole point of the goal setting is that you write out the specific skills and put a time frame on it so that you can, right? But and then get on the boat and work on those specific steps.
That's excellent. That's really good. Break it down and then track each one. That makes it simple. We were going to do a giveaway. You guys tell me about what you're thinking about.
Yeah, we were gonna do a couple books to give away for anybody who wants to have one of these for their own sailing, or if you're a coach who wants to use it with your sailors out on the water, and potentially maybe all of your sailors will want to use the book for going forward. We'd love to see why you would like to have one of these books, what makes you kind of a special candidate to receive one, and maybe it will show up at your doorstep.
Right. So yeah, you can send it. I'll when this posts, I'll put it on Instagram. Just send a DM to Whitecap Podcast, and then I'll send it on to Signe and Thomas, and they can decide who deserves to get the book. It's a great tool, like I say, and I wish we had stuff like this when I was growing up. But luckily, we're still in it. I still have time. To get.
It's not meant just for the kids, right? Anybody can really use it in terms of just tracking their sailing. So whether it's yourself as a laser master, whether you're just a Tuesday night club racer, you can still use it to sort of help your sailing. But it obviously was designed with the race teams in mind, particularly from the fitness perspective and other things of that nature. But anyway, I showed an initial layout to Ken Dool earlier this year as we were sort of putting the book together, and he kind of commented about like maybe some of our national team athletes should be using this too, right? So it can really be anybody, and that's sort of what we're looking at. We kind of geared it towards a specific segment, but at the same time, it's open to anybody.
Right. Definitely. And so the 3 big questions The first one is, Signe, you can go first. We're talking about figure skating for you. What do you love about your sport? What do you love about figure skating?
Well, it's an up and down kind of sport, but when the highs are at your best, it is like the best feeling in the entire world. And I think what I love the most about my sport, it's different from when I was competing versus now when I'm training. But if I could say a little bit of both, maybe from when I was competing, I love the competition aspect. I love getting out in front of the audience with all the lights and all the TV cameras and everything. And you're the only one they're watching. And I just remember looking up and being like, wow, I made it this far. And it was just like the most amazing feeling. So I think just that feeling of being free and being able to move quickly and the wind in your face and hearing the edges. And I was a jumper, so I loved jumping. That was my favorite thing. So but now as a coach, I just really honestly love seeing the progress. I don't care if you're going to the Olympics or if you are learning how to do a 1 foot glide and you are so excited that I helped you teach something that got you a little bit better. That just makes my day.
Wow, hearing the sound part of that is so interesting. Because the edges like can totally sound is so connected to like emotions
Yeah.
somehow too. Like you hear the ratchet block going, Thomas. It's just like, oh wow, you can feel it.
Don't
Um,
forget, I've been in a rink a lot of times. My daughter figure skating, so I know exactly what she's saying.
and what about you, Thomas? What do you love about our sport?
I think it's just the challenge of it. There's our field of play changes. We have so many different boats available, and each day is just a new challenge, right? You can never stop learning. My dad, who knew quite a bit and taught me a lot of it. S- Competing with him, in the Olympic trials, he's still trying to figure it out. He's still trying to, how can I make this faster? How can I make it better? And it's just a challenge of because you're never really finished, right? Because you might figure it out one day, and then the next day you got to start again, right? And so it's a challenge of just being able to kind of figure that out.
So next question is, what do you to this point, what are you most proud of in your career, Signe?
Well, I think my most proud kind of accomplishment is I guess I want to leave a training legacy behind that there is, this kind of sport specific training out there for skaters that I never had personally when I was competing, and I wish I had it. And I guess I'm just most proud of being able to develop something like this. And even when I'm gone, it continues on and it keeps growing. And I think that's the best thing that can happen for our sport is just evolving it and making sure kids are injury free and as much as possible and their lives are set for forever to be strong and not have to get hip replacements and like things that we all had to deal with in the past that now we can prevent a lot of these things and just keep our bodies healthy longer term.
That's great. Thomas, most proud.
Wow. There's a lot of individual sailing moments you could say, and certainly I think being able to compete with my father was probably one of the biggest sort of moments that I had. But I think I kind of ventured a little bit to what Signe said, and it's something I learned after my father's passing, because growing up under my father's shadow, that was just regular life to me, right? I didn't, he was dad and things just happened. But I think what I learned after he passed away was how much he helped people. He was just happy to get people on the water and see people enjoying themselves on the water. And I remember a story where a young crew came to a sailing event and, had these beat up sails, and he's like, "You're sailing with that?" And they're like, "That's all I got," right? So he goes, "Here, take my jib," right? And he's, "I got another one," right? And so I think, and since he's gone, it's not something I've tried to do, but in the roles that I've had, it's sort of something that's just sort of, I've kind of gone into and it's just sort of the helping people get on the water, continuing sort of that legacy of helping people learn the sport, understand the sport, and just getting out on the water and sort of similar to, seeing the progress that they make, whether they're youth or adults, that like, hey, I did this, or I'm enjoying this. And I think that's sort of, where I sort of get sort of the proud moments when I'm out on the water. Just you know, as the kid does a heavier jibe and he's like, I did it, right? You know, sort of like you're sort of there with them, going, yeah, we did it, right? So that's sort of where I get the most enjoyment for sure.
That's great. And finally, what kind of advice would you give to aspiring athletes who would like to improve, Signe?
In general, or in fitness, or?
Good question. And yeah, in general, yeah.
I think, am I first? I guess I'm first on all the
Yeah,
questions.
you're first. Yeah, go ahead.
Aspiring athletes who want to improve, I think the biggest thing is, you know, to set that goal and to never give up no matter what anybody says. I think one thing I learned just with myself, you know, I was older when I started skating. I was 8.5, and my coaches kind of, you know, back in the day, they were like, you're too old, you're never going to make it to the national level even, or anything like that. And I just was so mad that I had to prove everybody wrong. And, you know, it was one of those things that I would say, like, even if you're failing at something, or even if you're just struggling with something, there's always a way that you can maneuver, and the point starts here and moves all the way to the top, and you're always going to have ups and downs and different roads that you might need to take. But just keep your eye on the prize, put your blindfolds on, and just keep running like the horses in the race.
Good, excellent advice.
Yeah.
Thomas.
Yeah, I would echo that, but I think I'd add something else, and you know, is don't be afraid to ask for help, right? You know, go seek out, like, sailing's very friendly, or it should be, but you know, go up to the top guy and say, hey, why are you so fast? What are you doing? You know, how do I start better, right? And, like, you know, I love when people ask me about stuff, and you know, to be able to help them pass on that knowledge. So, you know, don't be afraid to ask the top people. They're not, you know, they were that, you know, that some years ago. They just worked hard and got to the top themselves. You can do the same thing, but don't be afraid to ask for that help. That's right. And that's, you know, that's the biggest, you know, because that you can learn so much from an experienced person that's gone through the same process you're going through.
That's amazing. It's almost 100% of what people that I've asked that question to on this show have said. Just don't be afraid to ask. You know, find someone who's doing it better than you, and find out what they're doing. The book is called Plan, Sail, Track, the Ultimate Sailing Guidebook. How would one go about getting one, Signe?
We have a website, flexifitsailing.com, and you can purchase one on the website, or you can also, if you live in Toronto, you can come and pick it up at the studio or at RCYC, where Thomas and I are located at the locations. We have a bunch of books there, so that's always an option. And then if you are using social media and you are, you know, not sure where the website is, at Flexifit Sailing on my personal social media for the sport, you can message me there and we can hook you up with a book as well.
Excellent. All right. Well, Thomas, Signe, thank you so much for your time. I appreciate it very, very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And as I always say, have fun, make friends, and sail fast. I'll see you on the water.